The sun beat down mercilessly on the firing range at Camp Pendleton, turning the sand into a golden haze that shimmered over the line of Marine snipers. Sweat ran down foreheads, stung eyes, and soaked the collars of their uniforms. Dust swirled in the dry wind, drifting in lazy spirals across the range, catching the sunlight like a mirage. Tension hung thick in the air. Most of the Marines had been at the range for hours, rifles lined up in perfect formation. Yet every target beyond 300 yards remained frustratingly unscathed. Frustration and exhaustion twisted together, creating a heavy, almost palpable atmosphere. "Damn rifles off again," one of the snipers yelled, slamming the stock against the ground. He kicked a nearby sandbag in irritation. "It's this piece of junk?" Laughter bubbled among the younger recruits, but it wasn't the carefree kind. It was nervous, tense humor, the kind that comes when pride fights with failure. They wiped sweat from their brows, shoulders tight, glaring at the targets that mocked their skill. From the edge of the range, a figure stepped lightly across the dust, unremarkable at first glance. She was dressed in standard civilian fatigues, a soft green shirt tucked neatly into her trousers, boots laced tight, and hair pulled back with military precision. She carried nothing but a small notebook and a calm presence that seemed to bend the chaos of the range around her. The Marines barely spared her a glance. "Who's she?" one muttered, shoulders tense as he lined up another shot. "She's just some admin type," another replied, snickering. "Probably here to hand out water or count rounds. Bet she can't even lift a rifle." The woman, Sergeant Maya Lawson, paused and tilted her head slightly. The sun caught the edge of her profile, highlighting the sharp determination in her eyes. She didn't say a word. Instead, she observed. Her gaze swept across the Marines, noting every twitch of a finger, every misalignment of a shoulder, the tension in their breathing. She noticed how the wind tugged at the rifle scopes, how shadows shifted across the targets. She had been here before. Not this exact range, not these exact Marines, but the pattern was the same. Chaos, frustration, egos colliding with gravity and distance. And always, the mistake was the same. They were too eager. They wanted the perfect shot so badly that they forgot the rifle, forgot themselves, forgot to breathe. A grunt of exasperation rose from the line. "This is ridiculous. I've been shooting since sunrise, and I've missed every target beyond 30 meters. Maya stepped forward a few paces. Calmly, quietly. No one took her seriously. And that suited her perfectly. "Can I borrow your rifle for a minute?" she asked, her voice soft but carrying over the wind. The laughter erupted before she could finish the sentence. Sharp, incredulous, loud. "You're kidding," one Marine said, shaking his head, smirking. "You want her to shoot?" "No way. Are you insane?" Another added, "Go sit down, lady. This isn't for whatever you do." She didn't flinch. She simply walked to the line and nodded to the Marine who had cursed his rifle. "The one you just said was broken." He froze, unsure if she was serious. Yeah, sure." "Go ahead," he muttered, still laughing nervously. "Bet you missed too." Maya knelt, adjusting her stance effortlessly. Her fingers brushed the rifle, checking the balance, the trigger pull, the scope. She didn't fumble. She didn't hesitate. Her movements were quiet, precise, almost meditative. The other Marines stared, a mix of amusement and incredulity on their faces. Some even leaned forward slightly, curiosity beginning to outweigh their skepticism. She breathed deeply, slow and controlled, feeling the rifle's weight settle against her shoulder. Her cheek met the stock as though it had been made for her face alone. Her eyes narrowed, focusing on the farthest target, the one the others had been missing for hours. She adjusted her aim slightly, accounting for the crosswind and the tiny tilt of the scope. Then she fired, crack. The sound of the round hitting the target echoed across the range. A perfect hit. The Marines froze. What? One whispered, crack. Another bullseye. The laughter died in their throats, replaced by disbelief. She reloaded with smooth, calm efficiency, and the third round struck true. And the fourth. And the fifth. By the time she hit the 10th target in a perfect string, the line of Marines had stopped, mouths slightly agape, eyes wide. The dust of previous failed shots floated around them like a mocking reminder of their incompetence. And yet here was this quiet woman, steady as stone, dismantling the assumption that only they could master the rifle. Her breathing never quickened. Her fingers never trembled. Each shot was deliberate, an unhurried conversation with the rifle and the wind, a dance she had learned over years of discipline and heartbreak. She finished the line and slowly set the rifle down, hands perfectly steady. "Rifle's fine," she said, almost as an afterthought, handing it back to the stunned Marine. No smirk, no fanfare, no arrogance. Only calm. Only control. Silence swept across the range, heavier than the dust, heavier than the midday sun. For a few moments, it seemed as if even the wind had stopped to watch. One of the younger Morans finally whispered, "Who? Who is she?" Another shook his head. "Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all." Maya glanced around, eyes meeting theirs for just a fraction of a second, and then turned away. She didn't need to answer. She didn't need recognition. To her, this wasn't about proving herself. It was about showing the truth every sniper knows. The rifle obeys the calm, and chaos obeys the patient. From the edge of the range, Gunnery Sergeant Blake, a veteran of more than 20 years, watched silently. Even he, seasoned and sharp-eyed, couldn't help but feel a flicker of awe. The name rang somewhere distant in his memory, a whisper of a story from the past he had almost forgotten. He would confirm later that this was Maya Lawson, former gunnery sergeant, decorated sniper, who had taught some of the Corps' best marksmen before disappearing into a quieter life. But for now, she was just a woman with a rifle, standing in the dust, calm and untouchable. The Marines stared, silence stretching longer than any drill or reprimand could. And in that silence, something shifted. The laughter, the mockery, the doubt, all of it fell away, replaced by a single, undeniable truth. She could shoot. And more than that, she could remind them what it meant to respect the rifle, respect the wind, and respect themselves. For the first time that day, the range felt alive in a different way, not with chaos or frustration, but with the quiet reverence of skill, focus, and control. Maya Lawson had arrived, and she had just reminded everyone there why some legends aren't written in stories or medals, but in the perfect, unflinching hit of a single bullet. The line of Marines remained frozen, a sudden silence thick as sand clinging to sunburned skin. Every eye was glued to Sergeant Maya Lawson, standing by the rifle with a calm that seemed almost unnatural. Some of the younger recruits shifted nervously, unsure if they were witnessing a miracle or a fluke. A few older snipers exchanged glances. One raised an eyebrow, muttering under his breath, "She can't possibly do it again." But Maya didn't respond. She was not trying to prove anything to them. She was simply about to do what she had always done, make the rifle speak. The target line stretched out before her, a dozen steel silhouettes, set precisely at varying distances. Beyond them, a faint shimmer of heat distorted the desert horizon. Wind whispered across the range, tugging at the rifles, rustling the dust, dancing lightly with the spent bullet casings on the ground. Most Marines would have tightened their grip, their nerves betraying their focus. Maya inhaled, slow and measured, feeling the rhythm of the wind like an old friend. Click, crack. The first round hit dead center. The metal target shivered and rang sharply in the quiet, startling a nearby bird into flight. A few Marines blinked, their jaws slack. Click, crack. Second target, perfect. Click, crack. Third, fourth. A perfect string, each shot landing cleanly in the center. The bullets sang a rhythm of precision over the desert floor, echoing in the Marines' ears like the pulse of a storm controlled. Every man on the line felt it, the impossible calm of her presence, the unwavering confidence of someone who had spent years living in chaos and surviving it. Whispers rippled through the ranks. How is she doing that? One Marine muttered, It's impossible. She's a sniper. Another replied, voice tinged with disbelief. But, even for a sniper. Maya's focus never wavered. She felt the recoil in her shoulder, the weight of the rifle perfectly balanced. She adjusted her aim slightly, accounting for the crosswind and the subtle tilt of the barrel. Her hands were steady, not rigid, not trembling, but alive with practiced precision. She was a conductor, and the rifle, the wind, and the targets were her orchestra. Gunnery Sergeant Blake, who had been silently observing from the edge of the range, exhaled slowly. Something in him stirred, recognition, memory, awe. Years ago, he had met this woman in a classroom full of recruits, young, brash Marines, all trying to prove themselves. She had been quiet then, unassuming, yet commanding. Now, she was reminding him why he had respected her from the start. A young Marine, barely 20, nudged the man next to him. Did you see that? She didn't even flinch. The older Marine shook his head, silent. It's not just flinching. It's control. Every shot, same rhythm, same execution. She's untouchable. By the time she reached the 10th target, the Marines had moved closer to the edges of the line, unable to resist the magnetism of her skill. Even those who had mocked her minutes ago now leaned forward slightly, curiosity winning over pride. The desert heat pressed down on them, but it was nothing compared to the pressure of watching perfection in motion. Click, crack. 20th target. Bullseye. Click, crack. 30th. Bullseye. By now, some Marines had stopped talking altogether, hands frozen on their rifles, eyes wide in disbelief. This quiet woman, seemingly ordinary in fatigues and boots, was outperforming the best marksmen on the base. Not by a little, by a lot. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. Every miss they had endured, every curse, every frustrated grunt, now seemed trivial compared to the spectacle in front of them. Maya didn't acknowledge their reactions. She didn't need to. Her mind was elsewhere, somewhere far beyond the range. Memories of deserts, gunfire, and missions past lingered in the edges of her consciousness. She felt the ghost of every shot she had taken in combat, every life saved, every life lost. Each one had taught her patience, control, focus. Every bullet was a conversation, every shot a reflection of calm in chaos. Somewhere in the back of the line, a Marine whispered, almost fearfully, She's like the legends they talk about in the classrooms. The instructors we idolize, but never see in action. Maya moved seamlessly to the next set of targets. 40, 50, 60 shots, all perfect. The range had fallen silent, except for the soft echo of metal ringing, a sound that had once been ordinary and now seemed miraculous. The younger recruits had stopped snickering entirely, replaced by an almost reverent awe. Even the older snipers, veterans of countless drills and missions, felt the hair on their arms rise. And then, at the 60th shot, the wind picked up. A faint gust swept across the line, stirring dust and carrying heat waves that distorted the targets. Most Marines would have hesitated, would have flinched or adjusted too much. Maya inhaled slowly, feeling the wind's rhythm as she had been taught years ago. She adjusted her aim just slightly, a whisper of movement, and squeezed the trigger. Bullseye. A collective, incredulous exhale went through the line. She didn't smile, didn't comment, didn't even glance up. She simply reloaded. 70th, 80th, 90th shots, all perfect. Each round fell with precision that defied their expectations, and yet she moved as if she had done nothing extraordinary at all. It was the quiet confidence of someone who had mastered herself long before she had mastered the rifle. The 100th shot arrived, and she fired. The target rang once more, the bullet striking dead center with flawless accuracy. She lowered the rifle and exhaled softly, the only hint that she had exerted herself. The line of Marines remained silent, stunned, eyes wide, jaws slack, hearts pounding. For hours they had struggled, cursed, laughed, and failed, and here was this quiet woman, calm, precise, and untouchable. She handed the rifle back to the Marine, who had lent it without a word. "Rifle's fine," she said softly. No arrogance. No smirk. Just a statement. Gunnery Sergeant Blake stepped forward finally, his voice low but carrying weight. "Everyone, listen. That was no fluke. That was skill. That was discipline. That was experience. And if you don't recognize that, you never will." The Marines looked at one another, shame and awe mixing in their eyes. The woman they had mocked, the one they assumed was a civilian, had just reminded them what real skill looked like. Who is she?" One whispered, unable to contain curiosity. Blake shook his head, voice quiet. "Her name is Maya Lawson. Former gunnery sergeant. Decorated sniper. Taught half the best marksmen you'll ever meet." The younger recruits blinked, stunned. The older snipers, veterans of countless ranges and battles, felt the hair on the back of their necks rise. They had seen talent before, but not like this. Not with this calm. Not with this control. Maya stood there, watching them in silence for a moment, letting the lesson sink in. She wasn't here to impress them. She wasn't here to compete or prove herself. She was here to remind them of a simple truth that so many forgot in their arrogance. The rifle obeys the calm, not the desperate. And in that moment, as the wind swirled around her and dust drifted in lazy spirals across the range, every Marine understood, even if only silently, that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Maya Lawson had returned, and she had returned not to boast, not to reclaim glory, but to quietly remind them of the power of skill, patience, and control. The desert sun beat down relentlessly, but somehow, in that heat, in that dust, the Marines had learned a lesson hotter and heavier than the sun itself. Respect the rifle. Respect yourself, and never underestimate the quiet ones. The desert sun burned high over Camp Pendleton, but the echoes of the range's previous chaos lingered in the minds of the Marines. Whispers of awe circulated quietly among them, but no one dared break the spell. Even Gunnery Sergeant Blake, a man whose voice usually carried authority like steel, simply watched as Sergeant Maya Lawson collected herself, moving with quiet precision. She didn't boast, didn't speak, and yet the silence around her carried weight far heavier than any words. As she adjusted the rifle for cleaning, her fingers traced the worn metal as if remembering old friends. For a moment, her calm exterior flickered, revealing shadows lurking behind steady eyes. Memories she had tried to bury resurfaced, memories of deserts hotter than this one, mountains sharper than any blade, and the distant echoes of gunfire that had once defined her life. Years earlier, Maya had been far from this range. She had been in Afghanistan, perched on a hillside, overlooking a convoy that was suddenly under fire. The sun had burned low on the horizon, the air tense with anticipation and dread. She and Staff Sergeant Kyle Rains, her fiancé, had been on overwatch, trained for situations like this, and yet nothing could prepare them for what came next. The convoy erupted into chaos. Explosions shook the earth. Vehicles flipped, smoke and dust, creating a blinding cloud. Maya's training took over instantly. She scanned the battlefield, her breath steady, hands moving with practiced fluidity. Targets appeared, enemy combatants, moments of danger that could decide life or death. She fired 1, 2, 3 rounds, 17 precise shots in under 6 minutes, each one deliberate, each one a life preserved. But the final moment came too quickly. A sudden explosion ripped through the air, shattering metal and bone. Kyle's last radio transmission, sharp, panicked, then silence. He was gone. The world tilted. In that instant, the woman who had been unshakable became hollowed, carved out by grief and loss. She had saved countless lives, but she could not save him. The memory haunted her for years. She returned home, refusing promotions, refusing assignments, refusing to touch a rifle again. She had chosen a quiet life, away from the chaos, believing that stepping back was the only way to survive the ghosts of war. But war, she learned, never truly leaves. It followed her, tucked in corners, surfacing in quiet moments like this one, when dust swirled across a range and the echoes of gunfire seemed to hum beneath the wind. Here at Camp Pendleton, the rifles, the sand, the targets, it was all the same. The discipline was the same, the rhythm the same. And as she adjusted the scope, cleaned the rifle, and prepared for her next demonstration, she felt the familiar pulse return, the rhythm of control she had always relied upon. She could feel the ghosts of past battles guiding her hands, steadying her aim, reminding her of every lesson she had learned through fire and blood. The Marines, oblivious to her inner world, were still watching, still processing the impossible display they had just witnessed. Many whispered her name, repeating it under their breaths, trying to reconcile the woman before them with the legend they now suspected she was. Some were angry, their pride wounded. Others were silent, awed, their respect solidifying with each moment of observation. They had mocked her, underestimated her, and yet she had done something they could not. She had executed 100 consecutive perfect shots. But for Maya, this was not about proving anything. She didn't need to impress these Marines. She didn't need recognition, medals, or acknowledgement. She had already faced life and death, had already walked the line between chaos and order, had already lost everything that mattered. This was about control, about clarity, about honoring the training, the discipline, the rifle, and in some unspoken way, the memory of Kyle. She knelt beside the rifle case, her hands steady as she cleaned the barrel. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic. The sound of the brush against metal echoed softly in the open air, mingling with the distant murmurs of Marines, still whispering among themselves. She thought of Afghanistan, of the long nights perched on hillsides with nothing but silence and wind for company, of the moments when a single decision, a single pull of the trigger, could save a life or end it. Maya's mind wandered to the lessons she had taught other snipers during her time as an instructor. She remembered the stubborn recruits, the ones who thought strength or speed defined marksmanship, the ones who laughed at mistakes but never learned humility. She had watched their failures, guided their hands, shaped their minds, until they understood shooting was not about ego. It was about patience, discipline, respect for the rifle, respect for the wind, respect for the consequences. Now, years later, she was silently repeating those lessons. The range was her classroom, the targets her students, and the Marines, though unaware, were absorbing the teaching through observation. Every perfect shot she had fired, every subtle adjustment of her aim, was a demonstration of principles hard won in battle. Gunnery Sergeant Blake finally approached her, stepping carefully across the dust. "Maya," he said softly, his voice carrying a mix of reverence and curiosity. "The men, they need to know who you really are." She shook her head, not meeting his eyes. "Does it matter?" she asked quietly. "They'll learn eventually, one way or another. If they want to." Blake studied her for a moment, sensing the weight she carried, not just the skill, but the memories, the loss, the years spent running from shadows she could never fully escape. "Some lessons," he said, "need a teacher, not just an example. You could teach them more than just aim. You could teach them control, restraint, the things that matter more than a perfect shot." Maya exhaled, letting the tension of the past few hours seep out slowly. The desert wind stirred her hair, brushed across her face, and seemed to carry with it fragments of distant battlefields. She allowed herself a brief smile, faint, almost imperceptible, but genuine. Teaching, guiding, demonstrating, this was her choice now. Her way to reconcile the past, to honor those she had lost, and to continue her purpose without succumbing to the ghosts. The Marines, still buzzing with disbelief, had no idea of the depth behind her calm exterior. They saw precision, skill, a display of talent that surpassed their expectations. What they did not see was the battlefield experience, the trauma, the grief, and the resilience that shaped every motion, every decision, every shot. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the range, Maya lifted her gaze for the first time in hours. Her eyes swept across the line of Marines now watching her, a mixture of curiosity, respect, and awe etched into their faces. For a moment, the weight of the past and the burden of memory gave way to a sense of purpose. She was here. She was ready. And she was not just a legend of the past. She was a living reminder of what discipline, focus, and resilience could achieve. The wind whispered again across the desert, dust drifting lazily, carrying the echoes of gunfire and the weight of history. And in that moment, Sergeant Maya Lawson knew she had not just demonstrated skill, but had begun to reclaim a part of herself she had lost years ago. A part forged in battle, tempered in loss, and honed in silence. The Marines would remember this day for years, long after the targets were replaced and the range cleared. They would remember the quiet woman who borrowed a rifle, fired with perfect precision, and never needed to boast. But Maya remembered something more profound. The ghosts of her past had spoken, and she had answered, one deliberate, unwavering shot at a time. The sun inched closer to the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across Camp Pendleton's firing range. The heat had dulled the energy of most of the Marines, yet a strange tension lingered, heavier than the desert air itself. Every man who had once laughed at Sergeant Maya Lawson now stood in silence, eyes wide, hearts pounding. They had witnessed perfection, 100 consecutive bullseyes, and it had shaken their pride, replaced it with awe. Maya didn't flinch. She moved slowly down the line, collecting spent casings and checking the rifle's condition. Her calm was deliberate, almost meditative, yet every Marine felt the power in it. This wasn't arrogance. It was control, a lesson in itself. "Listen up," Gunnery Sergeant Blake finally commanded, his voice carrying authority, yet tempered with respect. "You think you've seen skill? You haven't, not until you understand what she's doing out here." The Marines looked at him, then at Maya, unsure what to expect. Some shifted uneasily, pride wounded by the display they had just witnessed. Others felt a stirring of curiosity, the rare kind that could change a recruit into a sniper. Maya knelt by the next rifle, a familiar, effortless motion. She adjusted her stance, her hands moving with a precision that had been honed through years of combat and instruction. She didn't need to speak. Her actions taught everything the words could not. She took a deep breath, letting the rhythm of the wind guide her, feeling its subtle tug against the barrel. Click, crack. The first target went down. Click, crack. Another. With each successive shot, she demonstrated not just accuracy, but the patience and discipline that defined real marksmanship. Every round was deliberate, every adjustment subtle, almost imperceptible. The Marines leaned closer, studying her technique as though it were a sacred ritual. Her movements were like poetry in motion. She didn't rush. She didn't flinch. She simply let the rifle and the target converse in silence. And the targets obeyed. By the 20th shot in this second demonstration, the young Marine's whispers grew louder, a mix of awe and disbelief. How is she doing this? Every single one? Perfect. An older Marine muttered under his breath, "She's not just skilled, she's a master." Not many people in the Corps could do this. Maya's eyes never left the target. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Every hit, every measured breath, every slight adjustment of the scope spoke louder than any words could. She glanced briefly at the line of Marines behind her. Some were frozen, mouths slightly open, unable to reconcile the quiet woman before them with the legend that Gunnery Sergeant Blake had just confirmed. Some were scribbling notes, others silently mimicking her stance, trying to absorb even a fraction of her technique. "Pay attention," Maya finally said, her voice calm but carrying over the dust-swept range. "The rifle doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care if you're male or female, young or old. It only cares about focus, discipline, and respect." The men nodded, some ashamed to admit how quickly they had judged her. Their pride had been bruised, but that was part of the lesson, a necessary reminder that skill was earned, never assumed. Maya adjusted her stance again, taking another shot, bullseye. She repeated, and again, and again. By the 50th shot, a quiet rhythm had developed among the Marines. They began to understand not just the mechanics of shooting, but the mindset required. The wind was a variable, not an obstacle. The target was not an enemy, but a partner in a silent conversation. Gunnery Sergeant Blake watched them carefully. This was more than a lesson in marksmanship. It was a lesson in humility, patience, and mental discipline, qualities he had spent decades trying to teach recruits. And here, in front of him, a woman who had walked away from the battlefield years ago was showing that the truest lessons could never be learned from manuals or drills alone. The younger Marines began mimicking her technique subtly, the way she breathed, the way she adjusted her grip, the slight tilt of her head. Some hesitated, afraid to make a mistake, but Maya's calmness reassured them. She wasn't here to punish. She was here to teach. By the 70th shot, even the most skeptical Marines were beginning to see the depth of her mastery. One of the seasoned snipers finally whispered, "She's showing us more than accuracy. She's showing us control. Control of the rifle, control of ourselves." Maya lowered the rifle briefly, letting the lesson settle. She looked over the line, her eyes meeting each Marine's in turn. "You'll never be as good as you think if you rush. You'll never be as effective if you let your ego dictate your actions. Respect the rifle. Respect your environment. Respect yourself." The wind shifted again, carrying with it the scent of dust and gunpowder. Maya felt it like an old friend, subtle and insistent. She raised the rifle once more, firing the next 30 shots with a calm precision that seemed almost effortless. Each target fell in perfect alignment, a testament not just to skill, but to decades of experience, discipline, and survival. By the end of the session, the Marines were changed. Some were quiet, humbled by what they had seen. Others were energized, inspired by the demonstration of mastery. Every man understood something he hadn't before. True marksmanship was not about strength or speed or ego. It was about patience, observation, and respect, qualities that could take years to develop and even longer to master. Gunnery Sergeant Blake finally stepped forward, clapping his hands slowly. "That's enough for today," he said, voice steady but tinged with admiration. "You've all seen what real skill looks like. You've all seen why discipline matters. And you've all seen why we respect our instructors, past, present, and future." Maya lowered the rifle one last time, breathing calmly, feeling the familiar weight of its metal in her hands. She didn't need praise, and she didn't seek it. She had done what she had set out to do: demonstrate precision, discipline, and respect. As the Marines packed up their gear, many lingered, casting glances at her rifle, at her stance, at the calm in her eyes. They would remember this day, not just for the impossible display of accuracy, but for the lesson behind every perfect shot. Maya glanced toward the horizon, the desert sky tinged with gold and crimson. The shadows of the day stretched long across the sand, reminders that every day was finite, every lesson precious. And in that moment, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The Marines had learned, even if just a little, the depth of focus and discipline she had cultivated through years of pain, loss, and perseverance. She packed the rifle carefully into its case, checking each component meticulously. Her mind wandered briefly to the past, to Afghanistan, to Kyle, to the missions that had shaped her, but then returned fully to the present. The lesson was done, the demonstration complete. The Marines would never forget it, and neither would she. For Maya, the day had reaffirmed something she had long known. Mastery was not about ego or recognition. It was about calm, about focus, about respect. And every perfect shot, every lesson imparted, was a tribute to herself, to those she had lost, and to the craft she had never abandoned. As she walked off the range, the Marines fell silent behind her. Respect had replaced doubt. Awe had replaced mockery. And in that silence, Sergeant Maya Lawson carried the quiet authority of someone who had faced chaos and emerged unbroken, one perfect shot at a time. The desert wind had cooled slightly as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the firing range at Camp Pendleton. Dust swirled lazily in the golden light, mixing with the echoes of spent rounds that still lingered in the Marines' minds. They moved slowly, some still shaken, some humbled, and all still awed by Sergeant Maya Lawson, the quiet woman who had just outperformed every single one of them. Yet Maya herself seemed distant, her calm exterior masking a storm beneath. As the Marines packed up, she knelt beside her rifle once more. Her fingers traced the metal lightly, almost reverently, the way one might touch an old photograph. The weight of the weapon reminded her of the weight of her memories, of past battles, of lives saved, of lives lost. Her mind drifted, unbidden, to a place far from the desert she stood in now. Afghanistan. A burning convoy, gunfire ripping through the air, the screams of men and women she had once called comrades. The memories were vivid, sharper than any target she had ever aimed at, more unforgiving than the most exacting wind on the Camp Pendleton range. She remembered the hillside where she had perched with Staff Sergeant Kyle Raines, her fiancé, watching over a convoy that had been ambushed. Every muscle in her body had tensed instinctively as she scanned the horizon, tracking movement, identifying threats, calculating wind, distance, and trajectory. The attack had been sudden. Explosions had torn through the convoy, vehicles flipping, fireball after fireball lighting the canyon like the sun exploding on Earth. Maya had fired 16 rounds, 17 rounds, each one deliberate, precise, saving lives she could reach. But the 18th was different. Kyle's final radio call had been cut short by the deafening roar of an IED. She hadn't seen him fall, hadn't had time to react, and when the smoke cleared, he was gone. The grief had been a chasm, swallowing her whole. She had returned home, abandoning the battlefield and the rifle, refusing promotions, refusing recognition, refusing anything that would remind her of the chaos she had endured. She had convinced herself that distance would dull the memories, that silence would heal the pain. Yet here, standing on the range at Camp Pendleton, with the rifles and targets before her, the ghosts of those days returned in a whisper, a pull, a weight she could not ignore. She breathed deeply, centering herself. The rifle beside her was not just a tool. It was a bridge between past and present, between chaos and control. Each adjustment of the scope, each gentle click of the trigger, was a reminder of everything she had survived, everything she had learned. The calm she exhibited on the range was not born of ego. It was forged in fire, tempered by loss, honed through years of relentless discipline. The Marines, still lingering near the edge of the range, watched her silently. They had seen her skill, yes, 100 consecutive perfect shots, but they did not know the depth behind each movement, the memories she carried with her. Some tried to understand, some tried to imitate, but none could fully grasp the invisible battles she had fought, the ghosts she still carried. Gunnery Sergeant Blake approached again, a silent observer of both the skill and the struggle. "Maya," he said softly, as though speaking to a confidant, "the men, they need to understand why you're here, why you shoot the way you do." She shook her head, brushing sand from her sleeves. "Does it matter? They'll see it, one way or another. Skill speaks louder than words." Blake studied her carefully, recognizing the truth in her words, but sensing the hidden pain she carried. Some lessons aren't just about hitting the target. Some lessons are about control, about surviving yourself. You could teach them that, if you wanted. Her eyes flickered. Memories surfacing again. Kyle's laughter. The fear in her squad's eyes during ambushes. The way adrenaline had once coursed through her veins in perfect rhythm with each shot. She remembered nights spent atop hillsides. The desert stretched endlessly beneath her, every breath a negotiation with chaos. Every heartbeat a reminder that life and death were separated by the merest fraction of a second. Maya exhaled slowly, letting the tension of years seep out with her breath. "Maybe," she said softly, "it's time they learned more than just technique." She stood, her gaze sweeping across the line of Marines still watching her. "Shooting isn't just about hitting the target," she said, voice low but carrying across the dust-swept range. "It's about patience, observation, respect, respect for the rifle, respect for the environment, respect for yourself. You cannot let fear or arrogance guide your hands. Only calm, focus, and discipline will make you effective. Only that will save lives, maybe even your own." A silence followed, heavier than any command drill. The Marines absorbed the lesson, not as an instructor's order, but as a living example. They had witnessed perfection, yes, but now they were witnessing philosophy incarnate, the mindset that had shaped one of the Corps' most lethal snipers. Maya lifted the rifle again, checking the scope, adjusting her stance with a fluidity that belied years of trauma. She fired another round, bullseye, another, and another. The rhythm was hypnotic, almost musical, a silent demonstration of the mental discipline that defined her skill. By the 30th shot, even the most skeptical Marines were leaning forward, mimicking her breathing, adjusting their grip, watching for cues they could not fully understand. They weren't just learning how to shoot, they were beginning to grasp the philosophy of mastery. Gunnery Sergeant Blake watched quietly, sensing the transformation occurring. These men had come to the range thinking skill was measured in strength, in speed, in ego. Now they were beginning to understand that true mastery was quieter, subtler, harder earned, and far more valuable. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the range, Maya packed up the rifle, checking each component meticulously. Her mind drifted briefly back to Afghanistan. The burning convoy, the screams, the silence after the explosions, and Kyle's final words carried across the static of his radio. The ghosts were still there, but they no longer controlled her. She had faced them in every shot, every lesson, every demonstration. The Marines approached cautiously now, their expressions a mix of awe and respect. They had laughed at her minutes ago. Now they understood. Not fully, perhaps, but enough to know that skill, discipline, and experience carried weight far beyond their assumptions. "You've taught us more than I thought possible in a single afternoon," one young Marine said, voice barely above a whisper. Maya nodded faintly, eyes distant. "Remember it. Every shot, every target, every adjustment. It's not about proving yourself. It's about control, calm, respect." As the Marines filed out of the range, they cast lingering glances back, still trying to absorb what they had witnessed. Maya remained, standing among spent shells and shifting shadows, silent but uncheckable. She had returned to the battlefield in spirit, faced the ghosts that haunted her, and emerged unbroken. Her work was not done. The Marines had learned the mechanics. Next, she would teach the heart of mastery, the subtle art of control over chaos. But for now, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The ghosts of the past had spoken, and she had answered, one deliberate, unwavering shot at a time. The desert sun had dipped lower, painting the sky with hues of amber and crimson, casting long shadows across the firing range at Camp Pendleton. The Marines, still absorbing the awe of Maya's demonstration, lingered near the edge of the range. Silence dominated, punctuated only by the occasional clink of rifles being packed away or the soft whistle of the wind across the sand. But the air was no longer heavy with disbelief. It was alive with possibility. Sergeant Maya Lawson stood at the center of the range, the calm in her posture radiating authority without words. Every movement she made carried lessons for the Marines, though they were only beginning to recognize it. Gunnery Sergeant Blake approached once more, a mixture of respect and curiosity in his eyes. "You've got their attention now," he said softly. "Time to teach them what you know." Maya didn't respond immediately. She surveyed the line of Marines, noting the mixture of eagerness, hesitation, pride, and humility etched into their faces. Some were nervous, unsure how to approach her, still recovering from the shock of watching 100 consecutive perfect shots. Others were bold, trying to emulate her stance, mimicking her breathing, silently studying the rhythm of her movements. She knelt, examining her rifle once more. Then she looked up, eyes sweeping the group. "We're not here to play soldier games," she began, her voice steady but carrying across the dust. "You will learn more than shooting today. You'll learn patience, discipline, observation, and respect for the rifle, for the environment, for each other, and most importantly, for yourselves." Some Marines exchanged uncertain glances. They had expected drills, commands, or perhaps a formal lecture. Instead, they were being offered something far more demanding, a lesson that required focus, humility, and introspection. "Step up one at a time," she instructed. "I will observe. I will guide. But each shot is yours. Own it. Control it. Respect it." The first Marine hesitated. He was young, tall, and muscular, with a swagger that had carried him through basic training. Yet now, faced with Maya's calm, unshakable presence, he felt exposed, vulnerable. He knelt, adjusting the rifle as he had been taught, but every movement felt awkward under her gaze. Maya approached quietly, her steps deliberate, unhurried. She placed a hand lightly on his shoulder, guiding his breathing, adjusting the tilt of his head, the angle of his grip. She didn't take control. She simply offered guidance. "Relax," she said softly. "Feel the rifle. It's an extension of yourself, not an adversary. Breathe, observe, then act. The young Marine inhaled deeply, releasing tension he hadn't realized he was holding. He fired. The shot rang out, slightly off the bullseye. Maya nodded, unperturbed. Good, she said. You saw the miss. You felt it. Adjust. Respect the feedback. Try again. Time stretched as the Marines rotated through the line, each one learning not just to fire, but to understand. Maya moved among them, guiding subtly, correcting gently, allowing them to discover the lessons hidden in every round. She didn't lecture. She demonstrated, corrected, and encouraged. Every adjustment of their stance, every inhalation before a shot, every calculated aim was a lesson in control. By the end of their rotation, the Marines began to understand what she had demonstrated earlier. Shooting was more than a mechanical act. It was mental, emotional, almost spiritual. Maya had not just shown them skill, she had shown them mastery, patience, and respect. Gunnery Sergeant Blake observed silently, noting the transformation in the Marines. The young recruits who had mocked her earlier now mirrored her movements, carefully adjusting grips, aligning their sights, and breathing methodically. Some had hit bullseye after bullseye, their confidence growing under her patient mentorship. Others struggled, but they did so with focus and determination, rather than frustration or arrogance. Maya's eyes softened as she guided a particularly nervous Marine, a small, wiry recruit whose hands trembled with each shot. It's okay to be afraid, she said. Fear sharpens you if you let it. But do not let it control you. Focus, observe, act deliberately. Every shot you take is a choice. Make it count. The young Marine inhaled, letting her words settle, then fired. The bullet struck the target dead center. His eyes widened, a mixture of shock and pride. Maya simply nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. Good, she said. You felt it. You owned it. That's what matters. As the afternoon waned into evening, Maya moved along the line, correcting stance, guiding breathing, adjusting grips, always calm, always deliberate. The Marines began to absorb not only the mechanics of marksmanship, but the mindset behind it. They realized that precision was not about muscle or reflex alone. It was about patience, discipline, respect, and control over one's own emotions. A hush fell over the range as Maya fired another demonstration series, this time slower, more deliberate, emphasizing observation and timing. Each bullet rang true, the metallic clang of impact punctuating her instruction. The Marines watched closely, taking notes silently in their minds, committing every detail to memory. By the time the sun dipped behind the distant hills, the once chaotic range had transformed. Dust settled gently, the rifles lay in perfect order, and the Marines stood taller, minds sharper, their pride tempered with humility. They had seen skill, yes, extraordinary skill, but they had also seen the philosophy behind it. They had begun to understand what Maya had carried through every battle, every mission, every loss. Gunnery Sergeant Blake stepped forward, his voice breaking the silence. Men, you've learned more today than any of you expected. Remember this. Respect the rifle. Respect your training. Respect your environment. Respect each other. And most of all, respect yourself. You've had the honor of learning from one of the Corps' finest, a Marine who has faced more than most of us can imagine and has returned unbroken. The Marines stood silently, absorbing the weight of his words, the gravity of the lessons they had just witnessed. For some, it was a moment of transformation. For others, it was a humbling reminder that mastery required patience, discipline, and a lifetime of commitment. Maya gathered her rifle, checking each component one final time before securing it in its case. She looked over the Marines, a quiet authority in her gaze. Remember, she said softly, every shot is a choice. Every action has consequences. Control your mind, control your body, and the rifle will obey. You have the power to make every shot count. The Marines filed out of the range, carrying the lessons in their minds. They would not forget what they had seen today. They had laughed at her, doubted her, even mocked her. But now they understood. They had been taught not just to shoot, but to observe, to control, and to respect. And in that understanding lay the true measure of Sergeant Maya Lawson's mastery. As the last Marine left the range, Maya remained, standing among the spent shells and shifting shadows. The sun dipped fully below the horizon, the desert cooling, the wind whispering gently across the sand. For Maya, the day had been more than a lesson in marksmanship. It had been a step toward reconciliation, with her past, with the ghosts she carried, and with the discipline and control that had defined her life. She exhaled slowly, feeling the calm settle into her bones. The Marines had learned, and she had reminded herself, once again, why she returned, not for recognition, not for medals, but to impart the lessons that could never be taught in books or drills alone. Mastery was quiet. Mastery was deliberate. Mastery required respect. And Sergeant Maya Lawson, once again, had embodied it fully, leaving a line of Marines changed forever, one deliberate, controlled, unwavering shot at a time. The desert sky had darkened, the sun now a faint glow behind distant hills, leaving the firing range bathed in the cool, muted light of evening. Shadows stretched across the sand like ghostly fingers, curling around rifles and spent shells. The Marines were restless, still buzzing from the lessons of the day, but now a new tension settled in, a challenge unlike anything they had faced before. Sergeant Maya Lawson stood at the center of the range, calm and unshakable as ever. She looked over the line of Marines, her eyes sharp, assessing not just their posture and technique, but their state of mind. Today, she had taught them discipline, patience, and respect. Now it was time to test whether they had truly absorbed the lesson. "This is not just about hitting the target," she began, her voice steady and precise. "This is about control, observation, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. One mistake, one lapse of judgment, and it will cost you. Understand that before we begin." A murmur ran through the line of Marines. The gravity of her words was not lost on them. Many had experienced drills, exercises, and simulated combat scenarios, but nothing in their training had prepared them for the intensity of Maya's teaching. Her calm carried authority. Her words carried weight. This was not a game. This was a trial. "Targets are moving," she continued, gesturing toward the far end of the range, where steel silhouettes had been replaced with mechanized targets, some swaying with the wind, others mounted on automated tracks that shifted unpredictably. Wind will change, dust will rise, and you will have to adjust. Your mission is simple. Stay focused, observe, and hit each target with precision. One miss, can you start over? Understand? The Marines nodded, tension thickening the air. They had witnessed her skill, but now they would confront the challenge themselves. No longer could they hide behind mimicry or imitation. They would have to demonstrate control under pressure, the very essence of marksmanship. The first Marine stepped forward. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were fixed, determination etched across his features. Maya knelt beside him, adjusting his stance, guiding his breathing. "Remember," she whispered, "observe first. Adjust second. Then fire. Don't rush. Respect the process." He inhaled deeply, feeling the rhythm of the rifle in his hands, feeling the subtle pull of the wind and the sway of the moving target. He fired. The first shot rang true, hitting the center. Relief washed over him, but Maya's calm gaze reminded him that one shot did not make mastery. He adjusted quickly for the next target, firing again. Another bullseye. The process continued, each Marine stepping forward in turn. Some struggled, their hands shaking, their minds racing, but Maya's presence grounded them. She corrected, encouraged, and guided without taking over. Each adjustment, each deliberate breath, each calculated shot was a lesson in control under pressure. The wind shifted suddenly, picking up sand and dust that blurred the horizon. Targets moved unpredictably, their tracks jerking and swaying. Many Marines hesitated, second-guessing their adjustments. Maya's voice cut through the tension. Focus, observe, adjust. Don't let chaos dictate your actions. Control the moment, or the moment controls you. The challenge intensified. One Marine missed a shot, and she calmly instructed him to reset, adjust, and try again. There were no scoldings, no humiliation, only the insistence that precision required patience, discipline, and respect. Hours seemed to pass in mere minutes. The desert grew cooler, the wind carrying the scent of dust and gunpowder. The Marines, exhausted but determined, continued their rotations. Some began to find their rhythm, mimicking Maya's breathing, adjusting their grip, observing the targets with newfound focus. Others struggled, frustration creeping in, but her presence reminded them to remain calm, to embrace the discipline she had instilled. Finally, it came time for the ultimate test. Maya raised her own rifle, her calm demeanor unshaken, and positioned herself at the firing line. The mechanized targets now moved in complex patterns, some appearing and disappearing behind obstacles, others shifting at unpredictable speeds. The wind had picked up, swirling dust and heat in unpredictable currents. This was no longer a demonstration. This was a battlefield simulation, a test of everything she had taught. She fired the first shot, bullseye. The second, another bullseye. Each round struck with precision, each adjustment subtle, almost imperceptible. The Marines watched in awe, realizing that even under the most chaotic conditions, Maya's calm, her discipline, and her respect for the process allowed her to maintain perfection. One young Marine whispered to his neighbor, "She's not just shooting. She's reading it. Every movement, every shift, every gust of wind. It's like the rifle is part of her." By the time she reached the 50th target, the wind had become a formidable force, whipping sand into their eyes, distorting the horizon. Most Marines would have faltered, but Maya remained unshakable, adjusting her aim with subtle movements, compensating for the environment and maintaining focus on each shot. Gunnery Sergeant Blake watched in quiet awe. He had seen veterans falter under far less pressure, and yet here was Maya, demonstrating not just skill, but mastery under conditions designed to challenge even the most experienced marksman. The final stretch approached, 10 targets remaining, each moving faster, each more unpredictable. Maya's breathing was steady, deliberate, almost meditative. Her eyes scanned the environment, reading wind, trajectory, and timing with a precision born of experience and intuition. She fired bullseye. Another bullseye. Another bullseye. The last target appeared, swaying violently with the wind, partially obscured by rising dust. Time seemed to slow. The Marines held their breath, witnessing a moment that would be seared into memory. Maya adjusted, breathing carefully, aligning the rifle with the target despite the chaos. She squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck dead center. The metal rang sharply, echoing across the desert. Silence followed. Then a collective exhale, a mixture of relief, awe, and disbelief. The Marines stared, unable to look away. Maya lowered the rifle, breathing calmly, almost as if she had done nothing extraordinary. But everyone knew they had witnessed a culmination of skill, discipline, and mastery, not just of marksmanship, but of the mind, body, and spirit. Blake stepped forward, clapping slowly. "That gentleman," he said, his voice steady and filled with respect, "is why we follow leaders like Sergeant Maya Lawson. Today, you've seen what true control looks like. You've learned that skill alone is nothing without patience, discipline, and respect." The Marines approached her cautiously, their awe mingled with a newfound respect. Some were silent, reflecting on what they had just witnessed. Others asked questions, eager to absorb every bit of wisdom she had to offer. Maya looked over the line of Marines, her eyes calm but sharp, carrying the weight of experience and understanding. "Remember this," she said quietly, yet with authority. "Every shot you take, every decision you make, carries weight. Respect the rifle. Respect your environment. Respect yourself. And above all, respect the process. Only then will you achieve mastery in marksmanship, in life, and in every challenge you face." The desert wind shifted once more, carrying dust across the range. But this time it felt different, lighter, almost approving. The Marines, changed by the day's lessons, began to leave the range with a mixture of humility and determination. They had been challenged, tested, and inspired. And above all, they had been shown what true mastery looked like, embodied in the calm, deliberate presence of Sergeant Maya Lawson. As night fell over Camp Pendleton, Maya stood alone on the range, the rifles resting in their cases, shadows stretching long across the sand. She breathed deeply, the quiet settling around her. The ultimate test had been completed, not just for the Marines, but for herself as well. She had faced the chaos, the wind, the moving targets, and had emerged flawless, a living testament to skill, discipline, and resilience. And in that moment, beneath the desert stars, it was clear. Sergeant Maya Lawson was not just a legend in the making. She had already become one. Night had fully settled over Camp Pendleton, the desert bathed in silver light from a moon rising slowly over the horizon. Shadows stretched across the firing range, long and silent, as if the land itself were holding its breath. The Marines had gone, carrying with them the lessons of the day, lessons in precision, discipline, respect, and the quiet power of mastery. But one figure remained, standing tall and unwavering, Sergeant Maya Lawson. She had completed the ultimate test. She had mentored, challenged, and inspired. She had faced chaos in the form of moving targets, swirling wind, and the restless energy of young Marines. And she had emerged not just unscathed, but triumphant. And yet, the weight she carried went far beyond rifles and bullseyes. As she knelt to clean her rifle one last time, Maya's mind wandered again to the past. Afghanistan, the burning convoy, the faces of comrades she had saved, the face of Staff Sergeant Kyle Rains, her fiancé, lost too soon. The memories had once been a shadow over her life, haunting every quiet moment. Now they were a reminder, a motivator, not a shackle. Each bullet she had fired today, each lesson she had imparted, had been a tribute to those she had lost. Every precise shot, every patient demonstration, every calm breath taken under pressure had been a step toward reconciling the past with the present. Maya realized that mastery wasn't just about skill. It was about purpose. And her purpose had always been clear: to honor those she had lost by guiding those still in the fight. The moonlight glinted off the rifle as she packed it away, securing each component carefully. The discipline of the ritual calmed her, connecting the present to decades of experience, countless missions, and a lifetime of training. Her hands moved automatically, each motion deliberate, precise, a reflection of the lessons she had learned through fire and loss. She finally rose, standing alone on the range. The wind had softened, carrying the quiet hum of the desert night. The silence felt almost sacred. It was a moment of reflection, of acknowledgement, of closure. Maya breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the day settle into her bones. She had tested the Marines, yes, but in truth, she had also tested herself. And she had passed, not through perfection alone, but through resilience, patience, and unwavering discipline. Footsteps echoed behind her. The Marines, unable to resist the magnetic pull of her presence, had returned to the range. They approached quietly, respect written across every face. No one spoke at first. Words felt unnecessary. They had witnessed mastery, and they had absorbed the weight of its lessons in ways that commands or lectures could never convey. One of the youngest Marines, the same one who had trembled under her gaze hours earlier, stepped forward. His hands were steady now, his posture disciplined. "Sergeant Lawson," he said, voice firm but reverent. "Thank you. We understand now. Not just about shooting, but about everything. Discipline, patience, control, respect. You've shown us what it means to be more than just Marines. You've shown us what it means to be ready for anything." Maya allowed herself a faint smile. She had not sought praise, and she did not need it. But hearing these words, seeing their understanding, their growth, was a reminder that her lessons had taken root. She nodded slowly. "Remember it," she said softly. "Every shot, every action, every decision matters. Mastery is not a moment. It's a lifetime. And every day you choose whether to uphold it." Another Marine, older and more experienced, stepped forward. "We laughed at you today, Sergeant," he admitted, his voice tinged with humility. "We didn't understand. We thought skill was about speed, power, and ego. But now we see it's about control, about respect, about patience. You've taught us more than any drill or textbook ever could." Maya's eyes softened as she looked at the line of Marines. "Good," she said. "Then don't forget it. Carry it with you, in training, in the field, in life. Skill without discipline is dangerous. Knowledge without humility is useless. Respect is the foundation of everything you do." The wind shifted again, swirling dust lightly across the sand. The night was quiet, the desert still. For a moment, Maya allowed herself to feel a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The ghosts of the past were still there, yes, but they no longer held power over her. They had been honored, acknowledged, and transformed into purpose. Gunnery Sergeant Blake finally approached, his face shadowed but filled with unspoken pride. "You've done more than teach them to shoot," he said quietly. "You've shaped their minds. You've shown them the difference between talent and mastery. And you've reminded all of us what it means to endure, to overcome, and to lead." Maya nodded, the faintest hint of fatigue in her posture. "It's not about me," she said softly. "It's about them. Every Marine who leaves here today will carry a piece of what we practiced. Maybe they'll never know the battles I've faced, or the losses I've endured. But they'll understand discipline, patience, and control. And maybe, one day, they'll pass it on themselves." The group of Marines stood silently for a moment, absorbing her words, feeling the weight of her legacy. The desert night seemed to embrace them, the wind whispering through the sand like a silent witness to what had transpired. The range, littered with spent shells and echoes of gunfire, now felt almost sacred, a place where lessons had been learned, respect had been earned, and mastery had been demonstrated. Finally, one of the Marines spoke, his voice firm and clear. "Sergeant Lawson, will you stay on as our instructor?" Maya shook her head slightly, her gaze distant. "My work here is done," she said. "You've learned what you needed to learn. Mastery isn't about me guiding you forever. It's about what you take with you. Every time you pick up a rifle, every time you make a decision, every time you face the unknown. That's when the lesson matters." The Marines nodded, understanding the truth in her words. They had witnessed perfection, yes, but they had also witnessed humility, discipline, and resilience. They had learned that mastery required more than skill. It demanded respect, patience, and a lifetime of dedication. Maya took a final look at the range, the rifles, the targets, and the shadows stretching long across the sand. She felt a quiet satisfaction. The ultimate test had been completed, not just for the Marines, but for herself. She had faced the ghosts of the past, embraced her own discipline, and passed on the lessons that mattered most. As she walked off the range, the wind shifting gently around her, the Marines followed at a respectful distance, their minds and hearts forever changed. They had laughed at her earlier. They had doubted her. But now they understood. They had witnessed the legend, learned from a master, and carried forward a legacy forged in fire, discipline, and unwavering precision. The desert night stretched endlessly, the stars above shining cold and bright. In that vast, quiet expanse, Sergeant Maya Lawson walked with purpose, her steps steady, her mind calm. She was not just a sniper, not just a teacher. She was a living testament to what it meant to endure, to master, and to inspire. And somewhere deep in the desert silence, the ghosts of the past seemed to nod in acknowledgement. The lessons had been taught. The legacy had been secured. And Sergeant Maya Lawson, once underestimated, once doubted, had become immortal, not through fame or medals, but through skill, discipline, and the enduring respect she had earned in the hearts of every Marine she had trained. The night was quiet, the wind soft, and in that quiet, the legacy of a master lived on.